Hi there, this is Solid Ronan from Solid Ronan Films, and welcome to another double take. Today's double take is about Robert Mitchum playing Philip Marlowe, featuring Farewell My Lovely from 1975 and The Big Sleep from 1978. This edition is the Region A Shout Factory Shout Select, number 42. Unfortunately, as far as extras, they're all from The Big Sleep. An interview with Sarah Miles, an on location episode with Robert Powell when he used to do that show, an interview with Maxim Jakubowski at Murder One, which is a crime bookshop in London where he talks about Raymond Chandler, and a vintage featurette of The Big Sleep and trailers for both films. Obviously these are both remakes. Farewell My Lovely is a remake of Murder My Sweet, directed by Edward Dmytryk, which I'll be getting quite soon because it's one of the new releases from Premium Collection through HMV, finally on Blu-ray, and starring Dick Powell. And obviously The Big Sleep is a remake of the Howard Hawks 1944-46 film starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Now we'll start with the vastly superior film, which is Farewell My Lovely. This is so good. Mitchum would obviously make some really good films in the 70s, The Yakuza, Friends of Eddie Coyle, and this is another one. Now in the book, Marlowe's in his 30s, whereas Mitchum was 57 when he made Farewell My Lovely, and he just kind of adds to that feeling of a man alone. At one point he says all he's got is his hat, his coat and his gun. You feel that he's had a past where things haven't worked out. He's a bit of a drinker, like Chandler was himself. And he gets embroiled in this plot about an ex-con who comes out of prison, who apparently did a robbery by himself of 80 grand. He wants to find his ex-girlfriend, and people keep dying around the Philip Marlowe character. Both these films have amazing casts. They have like Richard Lester level casts. Farewell My Lovely, I'll just read some of them because I'll probably won't be able to remember them all. Jack O'Halloran, who again, you might not know his name, but you certainly recognise him. He's a large fellow. Charlotte Rampling, who was born to play this kind of role. I mean, if she was in the 40s and 50s, she would have been a femme fatale easily. She just has that look. Sylvia Miles, John Ireland, Harry Dean Stanton turns up as one of the cops who's slightly bent. Anthony Zerbe turns up. Sylvester Stallone appears as a heavy. You have Joe Spinell from Maniac and other films. He's in it as well. There's just a ridiculous cast. The plot is labyrinthine. Again, it's not really necessarily about the plot. It's about Philip Marlowe. It has great dialogue in it, very quotable. Obviously Chinatown was probably an influence on, well, lots of films that came after it, but I really get a feeling of LA Confidential. Whoever did the production design in LA Confidential probably watched Farewell My Lovely. There's not as much sunlight in this film as LA Confidential. There is a comment about the weather in this, being bad all the time, so that it's not the sunlit California that we usually see in these films. I think it's one of the more successful colour kind of film noirs. It is set in 1941. We'll get to when The Big Sleep from 1978 set in. So it's set during Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak of 56 way back in 1941, and Philip Marlowe keeps up with that. There's a real sense of kind of racial divide. There is racial language used, as would be used at that time. There's obviously a little bit more nudity and violence in this film because it was made in 1975 than the 1944 version of the film by Dimitrik. But it just has a wonderful sense of griminess and kind of dirtiness and corruption. It has the film noir tropes of people not appearing to be who they are. It still has that wonderful fatalism, which is something I really like. Characters who are trapped in a web and they kind of know they are. But this is Mitchum's film, as good as the supporting cast is, and he really does embody that feeling of worn out tires, somebody who's actually lived a life and is tired of it. He opens with the voiceover saying, maybe it's the weather and maybe he's just tired. And you wouldn't really get that if it was played by somebody in their 30s, as Marlowe was in Chandler's book. It's just he has that broken quality that he brought to a lot of his 70s performances. Mitchum's famous for saying, he's not an actor, he just turns up and reads lines. But he just has so much nuance in his looks and his expressions, and he can express a lot without actually saying anything. It's just a wonderful film. Again, I might make a comparison video if I see Murder in My Suite, which hopefully I should be getting in the next few days. But Farewell My Lovely is an awesome Mitchum film, one that I would highly recommend. You can see it being influenced by noir and things like Chinatown earlier, but also I think it's been influential to films that came after it, and no more explicitly than Michael Winner's 1978 film The Big Sleep, which, I'll get this bombshell out of the way, it's not as good as Howard Hawks' film, strangely enough. It's not even close. There's some things that I have to give them credit for. So after the success of Farewell My Lovely, Lou Grade, the famous Lou Grade, ended up producing this. Michael Winner co-produced it, wrote and directed it. And as you know, the bombshell, Michael Winner is not as good as Howard Hawks. And Michael Winner as a writer is not as good as William Faulkner and Lee Brackett, who wrote the 44-46 film. I have to give them credit for, they try something different, so they bring it to England rather than just making it in America again. And they make it as a contemporary film in the 70s rather than setting it in the 40s. It perhaps doesn't quite work, but I give them credit for trying that. Again, this has a ridiculous cast, along with Mitchum. It's got Candy Clark and Sarah Miles as the two daughters, more of them later. But it's got Oliver Reed, who is absolutely wonderful as usual, as the gang boss, the owner of the casino. He really brings that whispering threat that he would. You can imagine Mitchum and Reed closed a few pubs when they were shooting it. Joan Collins, Edward Fox, John Mills, James Stewart plays the general. Harry Andrews plays the butler. I mean, the cast is ridiculous. Colin Blakely's in it. Richard Boone, who was later in his career, I think he would die a couple of years later, but Richard Boone turns up. Don Henderson appears briefly as somebody who runs a garage. So the cast of both these films are just silly. The problems I have with it, the two daughters are just not very good at all. Sarah Miles, who plays the Lauren Bacall character, again, I give her credit for not channeling Lauren Bacall or trying to be Lauren Bacall. That's fine. But her performance is just way off. And Candy Clark as the kind of promiscuous girl with obvious mental problems. At one point she has seizures. She's just way over the top. So for me the big problem is the two performances of the two daughters. They're just so far beyond what they really should have been. And some of the casting just doesn't work. It's one thing to have like an all-star cast, but you still need to cast it properly. So for example, Edward Fox, who's obviously well-spoken and very posh and still has that Edward Foxness, they cast him as a bookie who dabbles in pornography, and it just doesn't ring true. Back to the Lauren Bacall character, I mean, I don't, obviously there's contractual things and all that, but I don't understand why they just didn't get Charlotte Rampling back, because she would have been absolutely perfect. Or even if they couldn't get Charlotte Rampling, just have Joan Collins and Sarah Miles swap the characters. Joan Collins plays the woman at the bookshop, which is a front for pornography because it's the 70s, so they have to update it. So the casting's just not right, even though it's an all-star cast. Jimmy Stewart, who was in his 70s at the time, he's absolutely fine, but he's only in a couple of scenes. Again, the scenes with James Stewart and Robert Mitchum are absolutely wonderful. The scenes with Robert Mitchum and Oliver Reed are absolutely dynamite, as you'd expect. But I just feel the casting's not right, even though they are quote-unquote, stars. And also the performances, especially the two daughters, are just not good at all. Michael Winner also seems to refuse to have any of the leading ladies wearing bras, because it's just nipples everywhere. I don't know whether that was the tagline when it was in the cinema. There's also like a shot where Sarah Miles and Oliver Reed are in a bar watching Oliver Reed's wife, who in one of the plot points, goes missing, but he shoots it with the singer's cleavage in the foreground and Oliver Reed and Sarah Miles in the background. Michael Winner is not Howard Hawks. I think that's a take-home message, just in case anybody thought otherwise. Yes, Michael Winner is not Howard Hawks. But it's a good film. It's watchable, but it's mainly watchable for Mitchum and his, again, that laconic style. The voiceover isn't as sharp or well written as the voiceover in Farewell My Lovely, but his interactions with James Stewart and Oliver Reed are just absolutely wonderful. Again, they tried updating it to the 70s, which is admirable, and again they switched it to London rather than doing it in LA or whatever. Again, that was worth a go, but again, nobody would mistake it for the Bogart Bacall Hawks film. But again, if you're a fan of Robert Mitchum, both these films are well worth checking out. Like I say, especially Farewell My Lovely, because I think he really brings something to the Marlowe character that other people who have played it haven't, which again is just that age, that maturity, that feeling of a man whose life hasn't worked out, a man who's broken, a man who's living kind of day to day, who has that fatalistic attitude towards things. But both the films, especially Farewell My Lovely, are full of great Mitchum stuff and great lines as well, and are well worth checking out, even if you prefer the originals, which obviously on one case I would think everybody would prefer the original. So thanks very much for watching this episode of Double Take. Again, leave your comments below. Which versions of these films do you prefer? What do you think of the casting choices in these films? And what's your favourite Robert Mitchum 70s film? So thanks very much for watching. Hopefully join me again for more Double Take videos. This is Solitude Ronin from Solitude Ronin Films, saying farewell.